The Hollow Kingdom by Clare B. Dunkle. Part 1, Starlight, Chapter 1. The next several days saw the girls settle in and become part of the rhythm of life at Hollow Hill. Some demands were placed on them, but they were free to roam their new surroundings for hours every day. It must be admitted that the two older women found their new charges quite exhausting. Whenever the girls burst through the door with a picnic hamper to go off on a long ramble, it is hard to say who of the four felt most relieved. It took the girls a week to find the Druid circle that their cousin had spoke of. They discovered it after supper one evening, quite close behind the lodge. The forest path they were following began climbing a steep slope. As they looked upward, they saw an evenly planted row of ancient oaks set in thick green turf. In the gaps between they could see a further row of trees, but so massive were the specimens in this double ring that they could not see past the two rows together. The enormous trunks, wider than the girls could span their arms, formed a perfect barrier, protecting whatever lay beyond from careless eyes. Hand in hand the girls approached this awesome barricade, and slipped between the giant sentinels. The tops of these hoary trees, so close together for so many ages, had grown into one dense, continuous ring. No sunlight pierced it to fall on the intruders beneath, and yet the green turf continued underfoot, right up to the great trunks. Inside the ring, the broad crown of the hill was almost flat. They could not see beyond the trees either to the distant hills or to the woods outside. They were in a huge room walled by living plants. Above them, past the tangled branches of the oaks, stretched a perfect circle of darkening twilight sky about 70 feet across. The lush turf formed a dense, soft carpet underneath, and small white field lilies sprang above it on long, thin stalks like tiny stars scattered across the dark green sky. Speechless, Kate and Emily stood and looked around. This was a silent place. No birds sang in the branches of the great trees, and Emily found no bugs crawling in the grass beneath. Slowly they wandered into the very middle of the twilight circle and dropped down onto the inviting turf. "Do you think the Druids built this place?" asked Emily. No. Kate knew this place was no ruined monument to a dead religion. The circle was alive and aware. It exerted a magical force that welcomed and comforted her, as if good people had arranged a place for her security and care. But if the Druids didn't make it, who did? "I don't know, Em," Kate said thoughtfully. "Perhaps our ancestors did. I feel so much more at home here than I do up at the Hall. And just imagine how the stars must look from here. Let's stay a little longer and watch them come out." As night fell on the tree circle, the stars shone in the round ceiling of sky over their heads. Kate gazed, enchanted at the brilliant lights hanging above her. She had always had a deep love of the stars. She sometimes felt that if it hadn't been for them, she never could have stood the loss of her parents. As long as she had the stars, she would never be alone. Even when she wasn't looking for them, she could feel their gentle radiance in her mind. They had never seemed as beautiful as they did tonight. One by one they emerged until the ebony sky was full, and the glittering net shimmered over their heads. "We'd better go back," warned Emily, thinking about what her worried aunts would say. They crossed to the enormous trees, now black in their own deep shadows, and slipped between them to find the forest path again. It took some time before they hit upon it in the meager, damp-old starlight. As they walked slowly homeward in the darkness, Kate tried to remember the beauty of the stars, but a vague presence intruded on her thoughts. She began to peer into the shadows. She couldn't hear or see anyone, but she was sure someone was there. Kate rambled in the late twilight as often as she was allowed, and she had never been afraid before, but now she held her sister's hand tightly. "What's wrong with you?" demanded Emily. "You're pinching me. We're not lost, you know. I can find the way home." Kate stared desperately back into the forest. "Em, there's something watching us," she whispered. "Oh?" asked Emily, very interested. "What? Where?" She turned around and peered unsuccessfully into the deep gloom. "I don't know," murmured her sister. "It followed us down the path. I can't see it, but it can see us. Can you feel it?" "No," Emily replied with a shrug. "It's probably just a fox. Come on, Kate, we'll get in trouble." And she towed her preoccupied sister across the lodge lawn. At the door, Kate stopped and looked back. The heavy shadows under every tree seemed full of menace. Once she was inside the house, the feeling left her, but it came back a little later as they talked in the parlor. The great aunts never drew their heavy curtains. Kate stared suspiciously at one gauze-covered window after another. She even rose and looked out into the dark night, but there was nothing there that her eyes could see. After a few minutes of this restlessness, her great aunts began to watch her in some surprise. Embarrassed, she excused herself and went up to bed. Night-time became an ordeal for Kate after this. Sometimes she would be free of the feeling until bedtime, when she would begin to pace and fret under the conviction that something was watching her. She, who had always loved the stars, began to avoid looking out the window after dark. Even in her bedroom on the second floor she would wake up in the night uneasy. She would lie as still as she could under the covers, peering around the room at the darkness, and she began to have exhausting nightmares. When Kate tried to explain her feeling to her great aunts, they laughed at first, then looked puzzled. Hollow Hill was so remote that no one ever came or went across its grounds. The aunts never even locked the doors. Prim watched Kate with concern, and decided that both girls needed more to do. They had been through a great deal, and they had too much time to dwell on it. She had already talked to the girls about sorts of lessons they had to learn, and had found Kate to be shockingly overeducated. Kate's father, seeing in his daughter a real intellectual enthusiasm, had taught most of her lessons himself. Both father and daughter were fired with love of literature, and they had spent hours reading and discussing books together. Aunt Prim was appalled. "I think it's sweet that she spent so much time with her father," said Celia. "Well, that's where her case of nerves has come from," declared Prim. "All that book reading, all that flowery poetry. It's enough to make any girl flighty and high-strung. Why, she's old enough to have a family of her own by now, and she's never been out in society. If you ask me, Celia, these girls have been neglected. No man knows how to raise proper ladies." Prim began teaching the girls practical skills, such as how to plan meals, keep household accounts, and manage servants. Over time, she and Celia observed with satisfaction that Kate was settling down. It is true that Kate slept more soundly at night because she was busier during the day, but she continued to be haunted by the powerful feeling that something was watching her. She couldn't avoid it or ignore it, so she just kept her worry a secret from her aunts. She could tell that it did nothing but upset them.